Today we will be installing a rear spring kit on a Shelby Mustang GT500. This modification not only lowers the rear by 1 inch, but improves appearance by reducing the excessive rake of stock ride height. We will also be replacing the factory bump stops with the lower Maximum Motorsports bump stop kit, or MM5BSR-2. MM cellular foam bump stops feature a rapid increase in rate as the suspension bottoms out, cushioning the impact at the end of bump travel before the damaging metal-on-metal contact happens. Both the H&R Spring Kit and Maximum Motorsports bump stops are available at our website at MaximumMotorsports.com. The tools we used for this project are a T40 Torx bit with 3-inch extension, lug nut socket, 15 and 18 millimeter sockets, 1/2 or 3/8 drive socket wrench, torque wrench, and for proper torque specifications, we used the 2005 Ford Mustang Workshop Manual. Before you begin, with the car at ride height, take the measurement between the center of the wheel and the top of the fender. That measurement will also be taken once we're finished with the install. If you don't have access to a lift, support the vehicle on jack stands. Remove both rear wheels. Remove both the sway bar to body mount and lower shock mount bolts. We'll start with the sway bar mount first. Once you remove both sides of the sway bar to body mounts, the sway bar should pivot freely. Jack the axle housing up to allow removal of the lower shock mount bolts. Once both shocks are dismounted from the axle, lower the axle housing down to allow enough clearance to remove the springs. Be careful not to let the axle hang on the brake hose. Disconnect the bracket from the body if more slack is needed. Check that the upper spring isolator stayed in place before putting the new spring in place. Check your springs to make sure that they are seated correctly on the perches. Then jack the axle housing back up to align with the shock mount holes. After making sure the lower shock mount holes are aligned with their mounting bracket, feed the bolts through, then tighten them. Tighten the lower shock mount bolts, enough so they're snug, as we will be torquing them to spec later. Next, reattach the sway bar to body mounts. We will also be torquing these later. Starting on the rear passenger side, use a T40 Torx bit to remove the stock rear bump stop and attached sheet metal bracket from the axle. To remove the bump stop from the sheet metal, firmly pull the bump stop at an angle, then take the provided MM bump stop and force it into the original sheet metal bracket. Be sure both surfaces are clean before reattaching the sheet metal bracket and bump stop assembly onto the axle. Use the existing Torx bolts and torque them to 24 foot-pounds. Repeat those same instructions to remove the driver's side bump stop. Set the car back to ride height again before torquing the bolts for the lower shock mounts, sway bar to body mounts, as well as the rear lower control arms. Torque the lower control arm bolts to 129 foot-pounds, the sway bar to body mount to 85 foot-pounds, the lower shock mount bolt to 85 foot-pounds, and the bump stop to 24 foot-pounds. Torque the lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. Take your ride height measurements again and compare the results with the pre-install measurements.